The year was 1560, and the cobbled streets of Paris buzzed with preparations for what would become one of history's most celebrated yet secretly horrifying royal weddings. Banners fluttered from every window, merchants hawked commemorative trinkets, and the nobility of Europe converged upon the French capital to witness a union that promised to reshape the balance of power across the continent. But beneath the gilded pageantry and diplomatic fanfare lay a dark reality that would haunt the corridors of the Louvre for generations to come. The bride was Isabelle of Valois, a child of merely 12 summers whose delicate frame had barely begun to show the first signs of approaching womanhood. Her groom, Philip II of Spain, was a man of 33 who had already buried one wife and ruled an empire spanning continents. What the cheering crowds witnessed as a triumph of statecraft was, in truth, the sacrifice of a child upon the altar of political necessity, a transaction disguised as romance that would destroy an innocent girl's body and soul over 7 nights of unspeakable horror. The story of Isabelle's wedding night represents more than just another tale of medieval matrimonial politics. It exposes the systematic brutalization of children that European nobility not only tolerated, but celebrated as diplomatic necessity. The 12-year-old French princess who walked down that flower-strewn aisle had no understanding of what awaited her in the marriage bed, no comprehension of the physical and psychological torment that would begin the moment the wedding feast concluded. Modern sensibilities recoil at the thought of a child bride, but in the 16th century, such arrangements were the cornerstone of international diplomacy. Royal daughters were commodities to be traded, their bodies the currency through which kingdoms sealed alliances and settled disputes. Isabelle's youth was not an unfortunate circumstance, but a calculated asset. Her fertility represented decades of potential heirs. Her malleability promised a compliant wife who could be shaped to Spanish interests. The negotiations that led to this unholy union had begun years earlier, conducted through correspondence between courts where Isabelle herself was discussed like livestock, being evaluated for breeding. French ambassadors praised her developing beauty and assured Spanish representatives of her good health and docile temperament. Spanish negotiators inquired about the precise timing of her physical maturation, seeking guarantees that she could fulfill her primary function as quickly as possible. Throughout these discussions, the child herself remained blissfully unaware that her fate was being determined by men who viewed her as nothing more than a political instrument wrapped in silk and lace. The wedding ceremony itself was a masterpiece of theatrical deception, designed to obscure the fundamental horror of what was transpiring. Notre Dame Cathedral had been transformed into a vision of earthly paradise, with tapestries depicting scenes of marital bliss and love conquering all obstacles. Hundreds of candles cast dancing shadows across walls draped in cloth of gold, while the finest musicians in France provided a soundtrack of ethereal beauty. The very grandeur of the event served to sanctify what was essentially legalized child abuse, wrapping brutality in such magnificent splendor that observers could convince themselves they were witnessing something sacred rather than something monstrous. Isabelle appeared that morning dressed in white silk embroidered with pearls, her golden hair arranged in elaborate braids threaded with diamonds that caught the light with every movement. Contemporary accounts describe her as ethereally beautiful but heartbreakingly young, her face still bearing the soft roundness of childhood despite the adult finery adorning her small frame. Those close enough to observe her closely noted the barely concealed terror in her eyes, the way her hands trembled as she clutched her prayer book, the pallor that no amount of cosmetic artistry could entirely disguise. The French court had spent months preparing Isabelle for this day, but their instruction focused exclusively on ceremony and protocol rather than the realities of marriage. She had been taught to curtsy with perfect grace, to manage her train with elegance, to speak the appropriate words at the appropriate moments. No one had explained what would happen when the celebrations ended, and she found herself alone with a man she had met only days before, a man whose reputation for coldness and cruelty was whispered about in every court across Europe. Philip II's arrival in Paris had been orchestrated as a triumph, with cannon salutes and elaborate processions designed to showcase Spanish power and magnificence. But those who encountered the king in private settings reported a man of unsettling intensity, whose pale eyes seemed to catalogue every weakness and whose rare smiles never reached those calculating depths. His previous marriage to Queen Mary of England had ended with her death in childbirth, a tragedy that Spanish courtiers attributed to her advanced age and poor health. The implication was clear. young Isabel represented a fresh opportunity to secure the Spanish succession without the complications that had plagued his first union. The wedding feast that followed the ceremony stretched on for hours, each course more elaborate than the last, each toast more flowery in its praise of the union's political benefits. Isabel sat at the high table beside her new husband, barely touching the delicacies placed before her, while Philip maintained conversations with various dignitaries about trade routes and military alliances. The child bride had become a prop in her own wedding celebration, spoken about rather than spoken to, admired for her beauty but ignored as a person. Horror of Isabel's situation began. As evening approached, the truth to manifest in subtle ways that escaped the notice of most celebrants, but were observed with growing alarm by her ladies-in-waiting. The girl, who had maintained perfect composure throughout the day, began to show signs of increasing distress. A tremor in her voice when required to speak, a glassiness in her eyes that suggested barely controlled panic, a rigidity in her posture that spoke of a child desperately trying to hold herself together in circumstances beyond her understanding. The bedding ceremony that concluded medieval royal weddings was typically a boisterous affair, with wedding guests escorting the bride and groom to their chamber amid much ribald joking and ceremonial blessing of the marriage bed. But those present at Isabel's bedding later reported an atmosphere of uncomfortable tension, as if everyone involved understood they were participating in something that crossed moral boundaries even by the standards of their time. The usual jovial banter fell flat, replaced by forced gaiety that fooled no one. When the chamber doors finally closed and the revelries faded into the distance, 12-year-old Isabel of Valois found herself alone with a man 3 times her age in a room where childhood would end and a different kind of existence would begin. What transpired over the following 7 nights would transform an innocent girl into a broken woman, her suffering hidden behind the facade of royal dignity that demanded she smile and wave while dying inside. The physical trauma was only the beginning of Isabel's ordeal. The psychological damage inflicted upon a child forced into intimate contact with an adult stranger would manifest in ways that court physicians had no words to describe and no remedies to treat. The girl who emerged from that week would bear little resemblance to the bright-eyed princess who had entered it, though the transformation would be carefully concealed from public view to protect the dignity of both crowns involved in this unholy arrangement. Contemporary medical understanding of childhood development was virtually non-existent, leaving Isabel to endure her suffering without even the basic recognition that what was happening to her was fundamentally wrong. The court physicians who attended Isabel during those first weeks of marriage documented symptoms they attributed to the natural adjustment of a young wife to her new circumstances. Their records, preserved in the Spanish royal archives, describe a patient suffering from what they termed melancholic humours and nervous exhaustion. In reality, these clinical observations masked a child's psychological disintegration under circumstances that would have challenged the resilience of a fully grown woman. Dr. Hernandez de Velasco, Philip's personal physician, noted in his daily reports that the young queen experienced frequent episodes of trembling, loss of appetite, and periods of silent withdrawal that could last for hours. He prescribed bloodletting to balance her humours and herbal concoctions designed to strengthen her constitution, treatments that only added physical discomfort to her existing trauma. The medical establishment of the 16th century possessed no framework for understanding that a child's mind and body might rebel against experiences fundamentally incompatible with natural development. The Spanish courtiers who observed Isabel during these early weeks noted dramatic changes in her behaviour and demeanour. The vivacious child who had charmed the French court with her spontaneous laughter and curious questions about everything around her had been replaced by a withdrawn figure who spoke only when directly addressed and seemed to exist in a state of perpetual vigilance. Her ladies-in-waiting reported that she would often wake in the night screaming, though she could never explain the content of her nightmares when questioned the following morning. Philip himself appeared largely indifferent to his young bride's obvious distress, viewing her adjustment difficulties as a temporary inconvenience that would resolve itself with time and proper guidance. Spanish court records indicate that he spent those first weeks focused primarily on diplomatic correspondence and administrative matters, treating his marriage as a completed transaction rather than an ongoing relationship requiring attention or care. His interactions with Isabel were formal and distant, conducted with the same detached efficiency he applied to all aspects of governance. The French ambassadors who remained at the Spanish court to observe the early days of the marriage sent increasingly concerned reports back to Paris. Their coded dispatches, deciphered by historians centuries later, reveal growing alarm about Isabel's condition and the apparent indifference of her Spanish guardians to her obvious suffering. One particularly poignant letter described the young queen as resembling a caged bird that had forgotten how to sing, her natural spirit seemingly extinguished by circumstances beyond her control or understanding. The transformation of Isabel's physical appearance during these weeks provided visible evidence of her internal trauma. Contemporary portraits commissioned by the Spanish court show a marked deterioration from the radiant child bride to a hollow-eyed young woman whose forced smile failed to mask the emptiness behind her gaze. Court painters, bound by the conventions of royal portraiture, were forced to employ increasingly creative techniques to disguise the obvious signs of distress, using cosmetics to add color to pallid cheeks and positioning her hands to conceal their persistent trembling. The Spanish Inquisition's influence over court life added another layer of psychological pressure to Isabel's ordeal. The rigid religious orthodoxy that governed every aspect of Spanish royal existence demanded absolute compliance with Catholic doctrine, including complete submission to her husband's authority in all matters. Any expression of unhappiness or resistance to her circumstances was interpreted as spiritual rebellion requiring correction through prayer, fasting, and penance. The very natural responses of a traumatized child were pathologized as moral failings that demanded punishment rather than compassion. The isolation imposed upon Isabel as part of her integration into Spanish court culture effectively severed her connections to everything familiar and comforting from her childhood. Her French attendants were gradually replaced with Spanish personnel deemed more suitable for their ability to enforce proper conduct and religious observance. The language spoken around her shifted from the musical French of her youth to the harsher consonants of Spanish, creating a linguistic barrier that further separated her from meaningful human connection. Letters between Isabel and her mother, Catherine de' Medici, provide heartbreaking glimpses into the child's desperate attempts to communicate her distress while adhering to the formal constraints of royal correspondence. These carefully worded messages, scrutinized by Spanish censors before dispatch, employed coded language and subtle references that a mother might recognize as cries for help. Catherine's responses, equally constrained by diplomatic necessity, offered only vague encouragements about the importance of duty and patience, revealing the complete powerlessness of even a queen mother to protect her daughter from a situation sanctioned by international law and custom. The physical consequences of Isabel's ordeal manifested in ways that court physicians struggled to explain or treat. She developed a persistent cough that defied all remedies, frequent digestive ailments that left her unable to maintain proper nutrition, and a pronounced sensitivity to light that forced her to spend increasing amounts of time in darkened chambers. Modern medical understanding would recognize these symptoms as psychosomatic manifestations of severe trauma, but 16th century medicine attributed them to imbalanced humors requiring increasingly invasive treatments. The Spanish court's elaborate protocols and ceremonies provided a theatrical framework that concealed the reality of Isabel's condition from most observers. Public appearances were carefully choreographed to present an image of marital harmony and royal dignity, with the young queen's every gesture and expression monitored by attendants trained to intervene if she showed signs of distress. The rigid etiquette that governed her daily routine left no space for spontaneous emotion or authentic human interaction, transforming her into a living puppet performing predetermined roles. Private moments offered no respite from this performance, as even her personal chambers were subject to constant surveillance by attendants whose loyalty belonged to Philip rather than to her welfare. The Spanish king's paranoid nature, shaped by decades of political intrigue and assassination attempts, extended to monitoring his young wife's every activity and conversation. Isabel existed in a state of perpetual observation that made genuine recovery or healing impossible, trapped within a golden cage that grew smaller with each passing day. The few courtiers who recognized the true nature of Isabel's suffering found themselves powerless to intervene without risking their own positions and possibly their lives. The Spanish court's culture of absolute obedience to royal authority made any criticism of the king's treatment of his wife tantamount to treason, while the international diplomatic implications of the marriage made external intervention equally impossible. The child queen existed in a vacuum of accountability where her suffering was simultaneously visible and invisible, acknowledged and ignored. The elaborate masquerade that surrounded Isabel's daily existence required constant reinforcement through carefully orchestrated public appearances designed to demonstrate the success of the Spanish marriage alliance. Each morning brought a ritualized preparation process where her attendants applied cosmetics to conceal the physical evidence of her nightly ordeals, dressing her in increasingly ornate gowns that disguised her diminishing frame while projecting an image of regal magnificence. The transformation from suffering child to decorative queen required hours of meticulous work, creating a facade so convincing that foreign dignitaries regularly commented on her apparent contentment and grace. The Spanish court's obsession with religious orthodoxy manifested in daily requirements that Isabel attend multiple masses, participate in elaborate prayer services, and submit to regular spiritual examinations by court confessors who reported directly to Philip. These religious obligations, presented as normal aspects of royal piety, served the dual purpose of monitoring her mental state while reinforcing her absolute powerlessness through constant reminders of divine authority and wifely submission. The confessional became another instrument of surveillance, where any expression of unhappiness was reframed as spiritual weakness, requiring additional penance and prayer. The architectural grandeur of the Spanish royal palaces, with their soaring ceilings and gilded chambers, created an environment that dwarfed the small figure of a 12-year-old girl while emphasizing her insignificance within the vast machinery of imperial power. The echoing halls and endless corridors through which Isabel moved each day served as physical metaphors for her isolation, spaces so magnificent and overwhelming that they reduced human presence to mere decoration. The very beauty of her surroundings became a form of psychological torture, surrounding her suffering with such splendor that protest seemed not only futile but somehow ungrateful. Philip's approach to his young bride reflected the calculating pragmatism that had made him one of Europe's most feared rulers, treating their relationship as a strategic asset requiring careful management rather than a human connection deserving consideration or care. His interactions with Isabel followed predetermined scripts designed to maintain the appearance of conjugal harmony while extracting maximum political benefit from their union. The king's emotional detachment, which his courtiers praised as evidence of superior rationality and self-control, created an environment where Isabel's humanity became increasingly irrelevant to her function as royal wife and potential mother. The Spanish nobility who surrounded the royal couple had witnessed similar arrangements throughout their careers, viewing Isabel's situation as entirely normal and her obvious distress as temporary adjustment difficulties that would resolve themselves through proper discipline and time. Their casual acceptance of her suffering reflected a broader cultural numbness to the systematic abuse of children that characterized aristocratic marriage practices, where political necessity consistently trumped individual welfare. These seasoned courtiers offered Isabel no sympathy or support, instead providing constant instruction on proper behavior and appropriate responses to her circumstances. The elaborate court ceremonies that punctuated Spanish royal life became stages where Isabel's deteriorating condition was displayed as evidence of successful integration into her new role. State dinners, religious festivals, and diplomatic receptions required her presence as living proof of the marriage alliance's stability, forcing her to perform contentment and grace while struggling with trauma that grew more severe with each passing day. The irony of celebrating her destruction as diplomatic triumph was lost on observers who saw only the surface pageantry while remaining willfully blind to the human cost. The letters that Isabel received from her French relatives, carefully censored and often delayed for weeks, provided tantalizing glimpses of the world she had lost while reinforcing her complete separation from any source of genuine support or understanding. These communications, filled with formal congratulations on her marriage and vague inquiries about her health, revealed the diplomatic constraints that prevented even her closest family members from acknowledging her obvious distress or offering meaningful assistance. The ritualized exchange of royal correspondence became another reminder of her powerlessness, connecting her to loved ones who were simultaneously present in her thoughts and completely unreachable in her reality. The Spanish court physicians who monitored Isabel's health approached her deteriorating condition with treatments that reflected their era's complete misunderstanding of psychological trauma and its physical manifestations. Their prescribed remedies of bloodletting, purging, and herbal concoctions designed to balance imaginary humors only compounded her suffering while providing the appearance of medical attention and care. The documentation of these treatments in official court records created a paper trail that suggested proper attention to the young queen's welfare while masking the fundamental ignorance and indifference that characterized her actual care. The seasonal rhythms that had once provided structure and joy to Isabel's childhood in France became meaningless markers in her Spanish captivity, where each day blended into the next in an endless succession of ritualized suffering and performed compliance. The changing weather and shifting light that once inspired her curiosity and wonder now served only as reminders of time's passage and her growing distance from the innocent child she had been. The natural world that had once offered comfort and beauty became another source of melancholy, its cycles highlighting her own truncated development and stolen youth. The Spanish king's increasing preoccupation with military campaigns and administrative challenges provided temporary respites from his direct attention, but these absences brought their own forms of torment as Isabel found herself under the intensified scrutiny of court officials determined to demonstrate their vigilance in protecting royal interests. The elaborate spy networks that Philip maintained throughout his territories extended into his own household, creating an atmosphere of constant surveillance where the young queen's every word and gesture was analyzed for signs of disloyalty or dissatisfaction that might require correction. The gradual replacement of Isabel's French attendants with Spanish personnel represented more than simple administrative efficiency, serving as a systematic erasure of her cultural identity and emotional connections to her homeland. Each familiar face that disappeared from her daily routine took with it another link to the person she had been before marriage transformed her into a political instrument, leaving her increasingly isolated among strangers whose primary loyalty belonged to her husband rather than to her welfare. The linguistic barriers that complicated communication with her new attendants added another layer of alienation, forcing her to navigate complex emotional terrain without the comfort of her native language. The religious artwork that adorned the Spanish royal palaces, filled with images of martyred saints and suffering holy figures, provided an ironic commentary on Isabel's own situation while reinforcing the cultural narrative that presented suffering as spiritually purifying rather than inherently wrong. The paintings and tapestries that surrounded her daily life depicted countless examples of innocent victims achieving salvation through endurance of earthly torment, creating a visual theology that normalized her abuse while denying its fundamental injustice. The very walls seemed to preach acceptance of suffering as divine will, making resistance appear not only futile but spiritually rebellious. The story of Isabel of Valois stands as a testament to the countless children sacrificed on the altar of political ambition, their voices silenced by the very institutions meant to protect them. Her 7 nights of horror echo through history as a reminder that behind every grand alliance and diplomatic triumph lay human costs that our ancestors chose to ignore. The 12-year-old girl who entered that marriage chamber never truly emerged, only a hollow shell remained, performing the role of queen while her spirit withered in captivity. Today, as we confront our own failures to protect the vulnerable, Isabel's suffering demands that we remember the price of turning away from inconvenient truths. Her story forces us to acknowledge that civilization's greatest monuments are often built upon foundations of unspoken cruelty, and that our capacity for progress depends upon our willingness to face the darkness we have inherited. The bells that once celebrated her wedding now toll as a warning that power without compassion creates monsters, and that the true measure of any society lies not in its grandest achievements, but in how it treats its most defenseless members. In remembering Isabel, we honor not only her stolen childhood, but all those whose suffering history has chosen to forget.